Hello, and welcome to 30 at 8:30. Well, actually, welcome to the 8:30 show. Today is Thursday, January 7th. I'm KJ, and basically, I meet every Thursday at 8:30 p.m. to chat with various individuals, have candid discussion, and highlight their reasons for supporting conservative policy and ideology. My first guest for 2021 is none other than Dr. Tony Campbell. Dr. Campbell teaches politics at Towson University, focusing on political theory, metropolitan studies, and a survey course on religion and politics. Tony served his country in the United States Army as a chaplain and received his doctorate from Liberty University Seminary. Tony is the author of two books, America Today and A More Perfect Union. He is the father of two. Tony has served on the executive committee of the Maryland Republican Party and the Baltimore County Charter Review Commission. In 2012, Tony led the petition and referendum effort against partisan gerrymandering. Currently, Tony is a member of the P20 Leadership Council for Education, a board member of Charter School in Baltimore, and serves on the Baltimore County School Board Nomination Commission. Welcome to the 8:30 show, Tony.
Hey KJ, I'm pleased to be here. Thank you. Happy 2021, everybody. Yeah.
Yes. I'm excited as well. How are you? How is your new year going so far?
Well, it's 7 days into it, and the world's still spinning. But we got problems. I'm sure we're going to be talking about some of that stuff tonight.
Yes, indeed. Let's just get right into it. So, for those who are new to the 8:30 show, I always like to start each segment with a fun game to get to know my guest a little bit better. So it's called This or That. I'll give you two options and you choose which choice you like best. So it's just usually like a random question, and then you would just respond with the first thing that comes to your mind. So it's not meant for you to kind of ponder or really put a lot of thought into your answer. It's just whichever one you feel that you correspond with best.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Are you ready, Tony?
We'll see.
Okay. All right. So here's the first one. Which do you prefer? Watch TV or read a book?
Depends on the TV show, but I prefer to read a book.
Okay. All right. Next is, which do you prefer if you had to choose? Book of Psalms or Book of Proverbs?
Proverbs.
Okay. Next, plastic bands. Are plastic bands okay at grocery stores, or ban plastic bands and charge for optional paper? Which process would you prefer or choose?
I'm okay with plastic bags.
Okay. Next is rice or mashed potatoes?
Rice.
Okay. If you had to pick between these two, who would you pick? Nikki Haley or Mike Pence for 2024 president?
None of the above.
So you gotta choose one. Which one? If you only had these two to choose. Would you not vote?
Okay, Mike Pence.
Okay. All right. Do you have a large circle of friends or a small circle of friends?
Small.
All right. And if you had to choose between these two, national mask mandate or let the states decide?
Let the states decide.
All right. Here's a fun one. Richard Pryor or Eddie Murphy?
Eddie Murphy.
Okay.
Well, I do have to say, so when I was, I'm 55, and so one of the things that I used to do was sneak Richard Pryor albums in my parents' basement and listen to Richard Pryor albums.
Yeah. I think a lot of people did back in the day. Yeah. So he was definitely funny. I still replay. Sometimes I'll play it on Amazon or his old stuff, and I'm still cracking up. Him and Eddie Murphy, really the old stuff. So, all right. And then open K through 12 schools or virtual learning for the rest of the year?
Open the schools.
Okay. And then my last one is prefer election month or an election day?
Election day.
Okay. All right. All right. So, yeah, that's all I have for today for that. Like I said, I usually do that, just fun, random questions just to see where you are on different stuff. So, all right. So next we'll move into our next segment, which is why are you a Republican? So if you could just walk us through your conservative journey, have you always been a Republican, or when did you first start to support conservative ideology and politics?
I've always been Republican. My parents were.
Okay.
Well, let me put it in a different way. I've always been conservative.
Okay.
My parents. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, near Pittsburgh, and basically there were no there were no Republicans there. But we went to church 3 times a week. My parents are very pro-life. I've always been pro-life. I've always been pro Second Amendment because we went and, West Pennsylvania, you go hunt deer, right? I mean, that's that's what you do. So I've always, on those issues, have been what you would call conservative Republican.
Okay.
But I was a registered Democrat until I moved here, and that was in '96.
Okay.
Yeah, I moved here in '96, and actually I ran a campaign for a guy who was running in that when Kwesi left the first time to go run the NAACP. There was an open, he left the seat, it was open. That's the one that Elijah won, Congressman Cummings won. And I ran a campaign for a guy named Ken Montague. And
I remember him, I believe.
And Ken wound up being Secretary of Juvenile Justice for Ehrlich during his administration. Smart guy, lawyer. I mean, I basically stayed at the guy's house for like 6 months when I moved down here and ran his campaign. And going around that campaign and just seeing, it was an education about how much the Democrat Party took the African American vote for granted.
And that was back then. You said
that
what,
was in '96, and I decided then, not only was their politics off whack, I mean, didn't believe in the same things that I thought were core values, but politically, to take the African American vote for granted. I decided then that I would rather lose every election as a Republican than be a registered Democrat in Maryland. And as conservatives and as African Americans, and especially and even in our party, it's not easy being a Black Republican. It's not easy even in the party to be a Black Republican, but I would do that 100,000 times than go through it's not even benign neglect. It's just they don't care. And we're going to talk about education. We're going to talk about these issues that, in the '90s, things were bad, and it hasn't gotten any better. It's gotten worse, So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And one thing I'd like to, just as you mentioned, so some people try to say, some people agree. I know at least in Baltimore City, when I speak to different people, and they may agree, they say, well, you're right. I'll say, well, Democrats have been in control for decades, and where have they gotten us? They've controlled the legislature, city council, they've controlled the executive branch and the mayor's office, police commissioner, everything, and we're still in a very dire condition in the city. And so the pushback I get is, well, what have the Republicans done? Or what can the Republicans do for me? Their policies don't speak to me. And so one thing I'd like to talk to you about is charter schools, because that is something, as far as education, that has been supported for a long time by Republicans. But I don't think a lot of people understand what is a charter school and how is it beneficial to people in the city and pretty much around the state.
Well, Maryland has an interesting way of going about it. It's a public charter school. So,
Okay.
so in the school that I am involved in, or I was on a board of until a couple months ago, um, the city would basically authorize 60% of what they usually pay for students. I don't know what the number is now, 17,000, 18,000, whatever that number is per student per year. They would give the charter schools about 50, 60% of that. And the thing that I've always found interesting in the charter school that I was involved in, which was 6th to 8th grade, they would get to the school, they would be 3 to 4 grades behind in reading and math. And when they left in 8th grade, they were at or above grade level. So it's not about the money. It's not about the kids. It's about, in my opinion, and it's been this way since I've been around here, it's about the bureaucracy on North Avenue and how they choose to spend the money. Back in the 90s, there were people that were, making six figures driving, Mercedes on North Avenue, and you had kids without books. And I think what a charter school does, though, to get back around to your question, is it doesn't have the bureaucracy of answering to the school system. So we were able to take the $9,000 or so that we got per student and turn it into in my opinion, a stellar educational environment for those 170 kids in Baltimore City. Now, the problem is for a charter school, of course, is that because of state law, it has to be a lottery. So you would basically put your name in a hat and it has to get pulled. And there are, we usually have about 800, 900 families that apply, and only 170 of them, that's all the room that we have. And so,
from anywhere in the
city.
Anywhere. Okay.
So the problem is that while it's great for those 170 youngsters to have a great education, there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of youngsters who, they don't have the opportunity. They're stuck in this mess. So what charter schools, in my opinion, when done effectively, is, in my opinion, it's the bridge. It's the I think what's the guy's name? And he just passed away. I'm going to kick myself. I forgot his name. Very, very intelligent and informative economist, African American. He just passed away like in last week. Fascinating guy.
I know who you're talking about. I can't think of his name.
I can't think of his name right now.
Not something Chris or something. I can't think of it. I know who you're talking about.
Walter Williams.
Okay.
And so what he said years ago, and looking at Baltimore and looking at that there are schools of 0% proficiency in math and reading, is that is the civil rights issue of our day. It is, these generations of kids that have been left behind, and we wonder why. Either we pay for it on the front end, and we make sure that every one of these kids have a solid world-class education. They're able to succeed and thrive, or we're going to pay for it on the back end, and 300 murders a year for 6-7 years now. We are paying for it.
Let me jump in and ask you this, Tony. So, and what you've described is what pretty much I've heard about charter schools. And so what I don't understand is where is the disconnect, or why are people so against it? Why isn't this all throughout the city? Why are people so against these charter schools?
I don't think the people, again, I'm dealing with... Not
people, but as far as the administration, like people in education.
Because of the unions.
Oh, okay.
There's no other way around it, and it's unfortunate. But the unions are the
teachers
ones that are
union.
controlling education in the state. They're the ones that are controlling that the fact that our public schools are not open right now, when we've had private schools open for 4 months, 5 months now,
Yeah,
and you
some since
haven't heard,
September. Some since
right,
September.
and you haven't heard anything about an outbreak in these private schools
No.
or anything like that. And the fact that the only reason why our schools are closed right now, it's not because of school boards, it's not because of superintendents, it's not about Governor Hogan and the State Board of Education. It's about the labor unions. It's about the teachers union.
Yeah.
And
And what do you, as far as the impact on that? So again, like you mentioned, you have several private schools in the state and in the city. Some cities that are in the city and throughout the state that have been open and since September in some capacity. And then you have these public schools that have not and are on virtual learning. What do you think the impact of that is going to be on our students? I mean, is this going to be like just a year actually a year and a half now probably that has been lost? Or how do you think that's going to impact these kids that have not been in school?
I think so. Unfortunately, I think we're not gonna see the repercussions of this lost year. It's gonna be 5, 6, 10 years from now. We're gonna still see repercussions on that because, in my opinion, I mean we've seen or I think people who have paid attention to education understands that there's a learning gap, right? And we're talking more socioeconomically, not necessarily race, but you can put race in that, as well. And that's when things are open, and that's when things are actually functioning, normally. I think that this educational gap is going to be huge because of social distancing and the virtual learning. Like I have a second grader and she's smart. But the fact of the matter is she is not around other kids. She is not. It's not just the kind of the educational; it's the social stuff too. But we're keeping. We're keeping her engaged as far as her schoolwork, but she's a kid. She's 7 years old, so there's some homework. I'm not doing it. You kind of, and so for parents who don't have the time, don't have the resources, and are struggling trying to be the breadwinner and the educator and the disciplinarian and everything else.
Playmate.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot, and I think that we're going to be seeing again the repercussions of this for years to come, because we're not going to be back in school until, if it's the fall, I will be thrilled if it's the fall. It won't be the spring. It won't be until we'll have another May that kids are graduating, not even stepping into school this whole year, and so what about again, I have a second grader, so I think that she'll be fine. But kids that are in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, I mean, those are critical years.
It's really sad, and like you said, there becomes, I believe, a socioeconomic imbalance, because you have these people who even can afford to provide tutors, or pool their money together with other parents. And I mean, if you have the money, your kids are pretty much going to be okay. Like you said, the private schools are open, but people who depend on these public schools are at a disadvantage. And I don't understand why the Democratic leadership in the city, they're crying about everything else and not talking about this. This is an injustice. The way that these kids are going to have are going to not be the same as these ones are going to private school or have this have the means to get tutors and things like that. That's an injustice.
Right. Well, and that's even before all this. still, I mean, we still have problems of inequity. We have Republican friends that don't think that that's the case. It is the case. And it's not about the money that's spent. Now, I'll be the first one that says that Baltimore City maybe it spends way too much money, compared to other jurisdictions. And I think a lot of that is waste and fraud and some other stuff because of what I've kind of looked at and been involved in. But the inequity exists. I mean, as far as kids and their growth and their maturation and their educational continuum and all that other stuff, that stuff exists. And it's even worse now. So let me go back to my original thought. So even when things were normal, education is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. And if we do not address that, we're going to be, again, front end, back end. We're going to be paying for this for years to come. We have been paying for it. Yeah.
And so, what is the solution then, in your opinion? Like I said, the charter schools. But as far as because are there charter schools now in the city, or not? How can we get more? How can we? Because the public schools are not working.
Yeah, there's a few charter. I mean, there's charter schools in the city, but they limit them through legislation. So the General Assembly would have to pass bills. In years past, the Hogan administration did make some push for charter school legislation or to expand charter school legislation. So I have to give the governor's team props on that. It never got passed, because the Democrats have a super majority and they want to protect the teachers unions and all this other stuff. So the irony here is that the party that is supposed to be for children, for families, they're the ones that hold up, in my opinion, I don't like to use the word progress, but if we're going to use the word real progress, that's educational equity across the board. And the Democrats are the ones that hold it up.
And what about what people, because some people I've heard, some Democrats have said, that when you have these charter schools, it takes away money from the public schools. And so then you leave these kids who aren't able to get into the charter schools, they're at even a more disadvantage because then they're left with going to these public schools that aren't up to par, or these failing public schools.
I would say they have a point if they didn't waste so much money.
And by that you mean what do you mean waste so much money?
I mean Baltimore City Public Schools.
Okay.
Here's the thing that I've learned being on the school board nomination commission in Baltimore County. There is no accountability that the school system has. The county executive will go, well, I'm not in charge of schools. I can't make them do anything. The governor says, well, I'm not in charge of schools. I can't do anything. School systems are separate, almost untouchable entities. And the reason why is because of the labor unions. And so there is no accountability. I guarantee you right now, there's no accountability. Brandon Scott has no accountability, cannot make the Baltimore City Public Schools do anything. Can't. Half of the tax revenue from the city goes to the public schools. But Brandon Scott has no effective control over what happens at North Avenue. And that's the way, and it's done by law. So, and so it's an easy fix, right? Because if somebody goes on with the schools are failing, the mayor can say, well, I have no control over it. The school board is like, well, it's the superintendent. They run the day-to-day operations. We just make policy, but we really don't have any control. The governor has no control. So basically, no one has any effective control over schools. And we're told a lie that these local schools are accountable to the parents and the children when it's not.
And so So are you saying then that all of the power is in the teachers union?
Yep.
If no one has control, then it's the teachers union. Then is that what it is?
It's the lobbying and the control that they have through that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something that I found fascinating, probably about a decade ago. I think it was, I don't know if it's Tommy Thompson or whoever it was, ran for governor in Wisconsin and basically just took apart the unions, just basically dismantled them, took them back to the table, negotiated with them to try to break up some of that stuff. I think really for educational reform to happen, there's got to be some kind of take on. You got to take on a labor union somehow. I don't know how you do it. I don't know, but what's been happening in the last 30, 40 years, it's not going to change until you change that paradigm about who's willing to control your schools.
And one thing you said earlier on is how you've seen where you'd have kids who were in public school and have entered the charter school, and they may have been several grades behind, but once being in the charter school for some time, you guys get them back up to at or above grade level average. So then are you saying then that it's not the kids? Because these are the same kids that have been in failing public school. Because some people say, well, these kids, they don't want to learn, they're disorderly and all things like that.
I don't think I think every kid can be taught. I think every kid wants to learn. I think every kid, if you give them the attention that they need to foster a good educational environment, I think every kid can thrive. I've seen it. I've seen kids that when they came in, they were kind of rowdy and trying to fit in and stuff like that, but they were model students when and within a year. And by the time they left in 8th grade, I mean, these kids, they basically every kid that we graduate either goes to the top high schools in Baltimore City, or they go to private schools like Boys Latin or St. Paul's or Mercy. They go to the top private schools because these kids. I mean, it's not the kids. It's the adults in the educational environment that you put around them.
Okay. All right. And I know you're working on some things. You're working on an upcoming book. Can you talk a little bit about that before we wrap up?
Well, no, it was just about your question earlier about kind of the learning, the gap, right?
Okay.
And just speaking to parents and students and actually and teachers too, because as a teacher or a professor, I can tell you that this virtual environment, it may be reasonable to do because of the pandemic and the stuff that we were going through, but it is not conducive to good learning or really functional education. It's not. It's not. And so the idea of the book is to kind of look at the larger picture, because we haven't really touched on it. No one's really talked about it. Kind of getting to. I mean, we see things on social media and stuff like that, but we don't have any real data from again parents and students and teachers about what they've thought of this last year, and so that's what it's about.
All right. Well, we are at the end of our time, Tony. Is there anything you'd like to share with the audience as far as what you have coming up next, any events, or where people can find you?
Twitter handles up there, Campbell from Maryland. There's a Facebook page of the same title. Just keep trying to share the light and not get many people upset, and if they do, right. Well, it's America 2021. So
right. All right. And then lastly, I end every show by asking each guest these two questions. What is your concern and what is your hope for your community and country? So you have 90 seconds to answer your number one concern and then your number one hope for the country.
I think the number one concern that I have right now is the Republican Party. We need to figure out who we are. I talked about that at the MDGOP convention.
Right.
But I think, we're kind of stuck in the crosshairs of, Trump and Hogan, and especially in Maryland. I think we need to recover who we are as a party outside of those two people, because it's not about the personality, it's about the ideology. And if we don't know what we stand for, then, look, I think the president has done a decent job. I think some things he's a little out there on, his personality and stuff like that. But how we're supposed to know what leadership is if we don't know what we stand for? So that's the biggest concern that I have. As far as our community, my community, our community, I think it's education. It's got to be education. That's the biggest thing that I'm focused on right now, and we'll see where it goes.
Okay.
Thank you, KJ.
All right. Thank you. Well, that wraps this episode of 8:30 Show. Like, share, and subscribe on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at Metro Conservative Media. You can also reach me at 830show@metroconservativemedia.com. I hope to connect with you again next Thursday at 8:30 p.m. Wishing you warm days and starry nights. Good night.